Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar. Today we will be discussing about operating exposure assessment. As we have discussed earlier session, exchange rate fluctuation is a risk. That risk may be in the form of transaction exposure, maybe in the form of operating exposure, and may also be in the form of translation exposure. In the earlier session, we have discussed about the exposure in the form of transaction exposure and how we can manage the transaction exposure. This session we will be discussing about the operating exposure, the meaning of operating exposure, and also how we can assess the operating exposure. When exchange rate fluctuate, it create some exposure. That exposure may be positive in nature, may be negative in nature. If exposure suppose in the form of appreciation of domestic currency, then it may create a risk for exporter, because with the increase or appreciation of domestic currency, the exporter who gets in the form of foreign currency convert their earning in the domestic currency, and they will be getting less amount. However, in the for a importer, the appreciation of domestic currency give some kind of benefit, but the benefit depends upon whether the importer imports goods which are goods or services or machinery which can further be utilized for export, then it create problem for the importer also. So, long run either appreciation or depreciation of currency which is beyond unexpected or cannot be observed in the domestic balance sheet, it is a risk for the exporter or importer. And such kind of exposure which change the value of the company or the value of the balance sheet of the company, it known as operating exposure. Operating exposure is nothing but exposure in the form of a value creation or value assessment. When a company has strategic point of view, they take position in the market to maintain the unexpected kind of foreign exchange exposure. They have to manage the foreign exchange risks in the form of expected appreciation depreciation or in the form of unexpected appreciation depreciation. The expected appreciation or depreciation, they generally factor in the day to day calculation, day to day management of the company. However, unexpected appreciation depreciation very difficult to predict. The company may not be in a position to absorb the losses. If it is a loss or if it is a benefit, they cannot absorb unexpected loss, and this create some kind of risks for the company. And when the risks are beyond the strategic level, the company has to take drastic decision to manage this kind of exposure. And one such exposure is operating exposure, which is nothing but a challenge for the company which are export oriented or import oriented, because this operating exposure need to be addressed not from the marketing side, not from the product pricing side, not from the any kind of derivative product side, but the end company as a whole, as a whole they need to absorb this kind of losses by proper planning and proper strategic decision making process. Today we will be discussing about this operating exposure, how the operating exposure can be defined, how the operating exposure can be assessed, and how the operating exposure once you assess, once you measure it, we can factor into their day to day planning of the company. Operating exposure, as I mentioned, these are the fluctuation in foreign currency, foreign exchange rate, which not only affect the individual transaction, but also entire value of the company. The impact of change in foreign currency exchange rate fluctuation may be in the form of appreciation, depreciation, which either predictable or unpredictable. Predictable exposure generally factor in day to day planning process. Unpredictable exposure need to be forecast and need to be addressed through proper strategic management point of view. Operating exposure measures the change in the present value of the company due to change in future cash flow caused by any unexpected change in the foreign exchange rate. Because the exchange rate fluctuation, as I mentioned earlier, have a two dimension. One dimension is we can predict the exchange rate some extent and on which are expected in nature, and other dimension is unexpected in nature. Generally, if a domestic currency depreciate or appreciate over a period of time, which can be predicted whether 2% or 5% in a year, and this exposure are expected in nature, and company generally price the factor this exposure in day to day planning process. But unexpected exposure create havoc in the problem for the company, and this need to be judged and need to be observed from the beginning of the company valuation purpose. Long term cash flow, which are part of the normal cash flow of the company and yet to be contracted, are affected because of operating exposure. It may happen that company might have planned for the company export import, but they have not contracted it, they have not signed an agreement with the exporter or importer, and this however they plan it for export or import, and this plan which are not being contracted create any fluctuation in the exchange rate, create risks for the company, and this kind of exposure which are unexpected, which lead to change in the value of the company, create individual transaction some risks. These are operating exposure. Operating exposure, as I mentioned the cash flow of the company, the value of the cash flow of the company affected because of operating exposure, and cash flow, as we know, cash flow are future oriented, which are not realized from the beginning, and any change in the cash exchange rate which affect the future cash flow of the company or the future value of the cash flow of the company is known as operating exposure. And since it is very difficult to assess the future cash flow, one hand, similarly it is very difficult to know the impact of foreign exchange exposure on the future cash flow. Hence, operating exposures are future oriented, and this operating exposure, once the company face or the company witness this operating exposure, they have to either change their position in the market, or this operating exposure may lead to what is called either the company may lose their competitive advantage because of operating exposure, or it may affect severely in the valuation of the company, because operating exposure generally affect the future cash flow of the company and future dominance of the company in the market or future market value of the company also get affected because of operating exposure. Operating exposure also known as strategic exposure, because it change the decision making process of the company, because the company forced to take strategic decision to maintain this operating exposure or to absorb this operating exposure. Generally, any appreciation of domestic currency, the exporter may not get the advantage of the competitive advantage of their export items, and hence their future export item depends upon whether future domestic currency will appreciate or depreciate. So, if similarly in the form of a importer, whenever currency depreciate over the period unexpectedly beyond the normal depreciation, the importer also get affected because of this unexpected depreciation of currency. Similarly, when you have not contracted any kind of exchange rate, or you have not contracted for export import, but you have manufactured the goods for export import, however, and keep in your inventory, whenever there is appreciation depreciation, their value also get affected. In operating exposure, as I mentioned, it is very difficult to not only to define it, but also to assess it and manage it. Operating exposure, it is not a one man to maintain it or to absorb it, is not a one man job in a company. Entire company, the marketing division, the product pricing division, the manufacturing division, and also the division which manage the pricing, manage the finance position of the company, should involve in managing the operating exposure. Operating exposure, when the company, suppose in case of India, with the appreciation of INR, the export competitiveness of Indian company get affected. When the company came to know that the the domestic currency, that is in case of India it is INR, is appreciating, that export receivable, when they convert into Indian rupee, they get less amount of the receivable, and this process also create not only the less receivable part, but also our own domestic product will be priced higher as compared to our competitor in the other country. Indian exporter may start to observe this appreciation of domestic currency. The Indian exporter may start what is called looking at the sources of depreciation, sources of appreciation. They come to know that they have to price their product as a less as compared to earlier, because our own domestic currency is now appreciated. So, our exporter, our export, the company export are affected because of that, because when the domestic currency appreciate in the international market, our product will be more price, and in this process the domestic company lose the export competitiveness. To prevent the export competitiveness or to enjoy the export competitiveness, the domestic price of the good should be lower. That means, the company should start reducing the price by either by sourcing the raw material from low other country, where it can be available at lower price, or the company can also start looking at other country where they can export their item, and similarly the company can also try to reduce the manufacturing cost. The company can also try to reduce the what is called direct operating cost, where labor cost also a part of that, and also the company can start reducing the overall cost of the company through more efficient production process. Because to prevent to capture the market in a appreciating currency environment, the exporter need to reduce the price of the good, and the pricing of the good can be reduced by through more efficient manner of manufacturing, by sourcing the raw material as a lower possible cost, by reducing the overall cost of production, by marketing it in other country where the currency is price is lower than the Indian currency price. And this is only these are the only way where the company can reduce the overall cost of production to maintain the market in appreciating domestic and currency environment. The company can also try to negotiate with the exporter, negotiate with the importer where they are exporting, because negotiation in the negotiation process, the domestic manufacturer of the product may convince the importer that my domestic currency is appreciated, and because of that I am losing the margin, and they can negotiate for increasing the margin, or what is called the appreciation part of the domestic currency can be absorbed some extent by the importer. In other word, the operating exposure in the form of appreciation domestic currency some extent absorbed by the domestic manufacturer, and also some extent absorbed by the importer of the country, importer of the product. Generally in a contract process, we cannot predict the exchange rate over a period, that is more than 1 year or 2 years, and in the contract itself some clauses are generally put for the renegotiation of price of export on the basis of appreciation or depreciation of currency. And this has become a normal practice nowadays, because exchange rate all over the world now fluctuating. The fluctuation is not one direction, maybe some extent appreciation, some extent depreciation, and in this process if the normal currency depreciation more than the expected, then the unexpected part may be renegotiable again in the form of signing a new contract. So, generally all exporter importer nowadays, if the long run export import decision, they are putting in a clause format for renegotiation if it is more than 5% or 10% appreciation or depreciation of currency is there. Because nowadays competitiveness is so high that any depreciation or appreciation of currency more than 5% create a difficult environment to operate, because the margin of competitiveness has declined over the year. The margin the exporter importer nowadays enjoying is very thin in nature, because of competitiveness in the country, competition in the world market. When we mention about the definition of the operating exposure, the meaning of the operating exposure, and how it can affect the domestic exporter importer, let us now define what is called quantifying the operating exposure. Quantification is very difficult, because as I mentioned earlier, the operating exposure affect the future cash flow. To quantify the impact of appreciation or depreciation of currency on the future cash flow, then we have to first predict what the component of future cash flow. After that, you can define or you can measure the impact of appreciation or depreciation of currency on the future cash flow. If you see, the quantification of operating exposure is difficult, as change in the exchange rate affect future cash flow of a company. Operating cash flow can be categorized into two categories, that is cash flow arise from intercompany and cash flow arise from intracompany receivables and payables. Because when you mention that intercompany and intracompany, we have to read in such a way that company nowadays MNC, multinational company, they have subsidiary all over the world. When the export import takes place among the subsidiary, it is called intra-company transfer of receivables or payables, payment of lease rental, what is called payment of royalty, payment of some technology fee, that is intra-company transfer. Intra-company transfer of receivables, payables or any other form of cash flow generally managed in a different way. However, when we are discussing operating exposure, we are not discussing of the intra-company transfer, but we are discussing about intercompany transfer. Intra-company transfer takes place through transfer pricing mechanism, and the transfer pricing mechanism is beyond the scope of the operating exposure. That can be observed, that can be redefined when we discuss about translation exposure, but here we are discussing about intercompany operating exposure. And intercompany operating exposure, we have to define whether the company is a receivable company or payable company, because generally we cannot find a company always receivable, we cannot find a company always payable company, because company generally receive and pay in foreign currency if their exposures are in foreign currency. And whenever receivables payables are involved, the receivable payable for our operating exposure should be future oriented, which generally affect the future cash flow of the company. Future cash flow of the company depends upon the what is called the company exposure or company size in the world market. The company size is very big and future cash flow are significant, then generally the operating exposure may change the competitiveness of the domestic company. However, the domestic company has less amount of future cash flow, that is future cash flow which are foreign currency denominated as very less compared to domestic currency, then it may not affect what is called the company valuation side. However, when you mention here that we are discussing about operating exposure for a company which cash flow is significant in foreign currency and spread over the many years, definitely any appreciation or depreciation of domestic currency affect the value of the company and the competitiveness of the company. Our discussion is on that kind of company which cash flow are future oriented, the cash flow are foreign currency denominated and are significant enough to change the value of the company in future because of appreciation or depreciation of currency. And here we have to understand that we are operating in an environment where efficient foreign currency market is prevailed. When efficient foreign currency market is prevailed, we can predict some kind of exchange rate which are appreciation depreciation. The part of appreciation or depreciation may be predictable and some part will be unpredictable, and predictable exchange part we are factoring in the pricing of the goods itself, in the planning process, or in the negotiation process. Unpredictable part is nothing but our operating exposure, and the unpredictable part, if it is prevail upon the company for a few years, then it will change the value of the company, because any unpredictable which are significant enough to change the value of the company or value of the future cash flow may affect the company valuation also. And we are discussing about that kind of exposure which are unanticipated, which cannot be planned from the beginning, and which can change, which are significant enough to change the value of the company. Accordingly, we now we try to quantify the foreign operating exposure. To understand the quantification part of the foreign exchange operating exposure, let us discuss a problem. The problem is here an Indian exporter. The Indian exporter is agreed to supply what is called 1500 units of pen drive to Walmart. Walmart agreed to pay 8 USD, that is US dollar per piece of pen drive. On the day of contract signing between Walmart and domestic Indian company, the exchange rate prevailed in the market was 51 rupees per USD. The direct cost of manufacturing per unit of pen drive is 350 rupees, and the fixed cost for the company to manufacture what is called 15,000 units of pen drive, which something around 400,000 INR, and this 400,000 once in a year. And the company manufacturing base can produce 20,000 units of pen drive in a year. Now, question is here, so long as rupee is not depreciating beyond 51 and company transaction process does not change and Walmart continue to buy 15,000 unit per unit at $8, there is no problem for the company. Suppose here the operating exposure is there because enter 20,000 units which is manufactured by the Indian company, significant part, that is 15,000 units are exported and exported to only one company, that is Walmart, and Walmart agreed to pay at $8 per unit. But when the Walmart, the entire process of transaction or manufacturing, that is the pricing of the product at one unit is $8 defined by the Indian company by assuming that rupee will prevail at 51 per dollar and the fixed cost remain as $400,000. Similarly, the direct cost of manufacturing as 350 rupees per unit, and these are the assumptions. Rupee may not prevail at 51. If rupee appreciate the entire and appreciation is significant enough, then the operating exposure, that is in the form of cash flow, will change the value of the company. And our discussion is on this, on the basis of if rupee appreciate significantly, what will happen to the company, how much will be the operating exposure, and what way the company can absorb the operating exposure. This is our discussion part. Let us start to solve this problem. First, you measure the operating exposure, identify the operating exposure, then we will manage, then you quantify the operating exposure and try to find some kind of solution to absorb this operating exposure. Here we assume that the company is producing 15,000 unit of pen drive. The export unit is how much they are exporting? The export unit is 15,000. The export unit is 15,000 and per pen drive the company is getting USD 8 and direct cost, direct manufacturing cost, direct cost of manufacturing in INR, that is it is manufactured in India. So, in INR or Indian rupee it is 350 per pen drive. And when they take the decision, that time the rupee was 51 per USD, that is US dollar. and here the fixed cost of production, fixed cost of production in INR, that is Indian rupee, is 400,000. Now, so long as rupee remains at 51, Walmart continue to purchase at $8 per unit and per unit manufacturing remain at 350, there is no problem for the Indian company. However, if rupee appreciate, then that will create what is called operating exposure, because the entire cash flow of the company, that is future cash flow of the company, depends upon the export of 15,000 unit, and they continue to export if the manufacturing, that is a pen drive cost per unit is $8. Now, suppose we are let us imagine that, let us assume that, or let us find estimate that rupee appreciated to 48 rupees per dollar. Let us assume, assumption is that rupee become 48 per USD. Rupee is 48 per USD. Now, question, what will happen? So, if you put the entire thing in the form of a discussion, that now rupee is appreciating by 248. Now, initial calculation was, when we calculate initially our pen drive cost in US dollar is 8, then we have Indian rupee and USD. The calculation was per USD is 51 rupees. Our direct manufacturing cost, is in Indian rupee 350. So, now 350 is direct cost and 51 rupees is per dollar and $8 per unit. Now, per unit cost that is $8 in INR, that is Indian rupee, is 51 into 8. 51 into 8, because 1 unit is 8 rupees, $8 and $1 is 51 rupees. So, per unit cost is 408 rupees. Now, but direct cost per unit is 350. So, contribution per unit is per unit of sale, that is one pen drive is sold by the Indian company to the Walmart, the contribution per unit is something around 58 rupees. 58 rupees. Now, the company, Indian company, promised to export 15,000 unit. So, contribution of 15,000 unit will be 58 into 15,000, that will be coming, if you see the table, 58 into 15,000, 58 in 15,000, that will be coming sales of direct cost, we are getting that, and finally, the contribution is coming 47 something, and this is the cost I have mentioned here. This is direct contribution is. But however, the sales, planned sales is 15,000. So, 15,000 when sales, the sales will be in Indian rupee, it will be 8 per unit. We are exporting 15,000 unit, and per dollar is 51 rupees. So, direct sale will be how much? Something around it coming 612. This is the direct sale in INR, Indian rupee. And question is fixed cost is fixed cost, every year the company has to absorb the fixed cost. The fixed cost is here 400,000. 400,000, total sales will be sales in the form of Indian rupees 612,0000 and total fixed cost is 400,000. So, contribution, what is called the contribution is will be contribution, or what can we can tell it in other word, profit will be 47,000 for 47,0000 Indian rupee. So, if there is no change, what you have done here, we have cost per unit cost. If you see the table, per unit cost is $8 and per dollar per spot price is 51 and the company has a fixed cost 400,000. Company has a fixed cost of 400,000 and cost per unit is 350. How we got 350? Now, 350 is nothing but direct cost is given to us 350, that is in India the company producing 1 unit of pen drive at 350 rupees and 300 he is getting per unit export, the company making a profit of 58 rupees. 58 rupees how we got? 51 into 8 minus 350, that is how much you got by exporting it, how much you pay to manufacture it, that difference is 350 rupees per unit manufacturing. Then, but the company promised to sell 15,000, a 15,000 unit and per unit is $8. So, 15,000 into 8, that is dollar amount of export. To convert into Indian rupee, you multiply dollar amount of export into 51 rupees the exchange rate. You got every sales amount 612,0000. Now, the fixed cost of the company is 400,000. The fixed cost need to be observed, then sales minus the fixed cost, other it is coming something around fixed cost is observe the company, the direct cost already there. So, the contribution part is 47,0000. That is, if the company export 15,000 unit, per unit price is $8 and dollar remains at 51 rupees, the company can get what is called a 47,0000 as profit, but that is not happening because rupee appreciating to $48 per dollar. Now, when rupee appreciate to 48 per dollar, if second INR appreciation, if INR appreciate to 48, that is value of the INR increasing in terms of dollar, US dollar. Now, same amount continue, everything remains same, the company making a loss of 60,000, because the company now in place of 51 is getting when you export one unit, they were getting 58 rupees as contribution margin. Since rupee appreciated to 48, the contribution margin declined to 34, but at the same time company need to absorb all direct cost, all fixed cost, there is no change here. So, company because of the appreciation of dollar, appreciation of Indian rupee, the company is making a loss of 60,000. The company realized that rupee is appreciating, because of that reason that planned volume of sold, planned volume has declined from 15,000 to 10,000, because when rupee appreciate, the Walmart may not agree to purchase 15,000, because the demand may be reduced because of appreciation of Indian rupee. They might have got the import from other country where US dollar, that other country domestic currency may not have appreciated. So, with the appreciation of domestic currency, the Indian rupee appreciation affected the exporter, and export demand reduced from 15,000 to 10,000. So, one aspect, the 15,000 of volume of export reduced to 10,000, and this has affected the company. At the same time, the 51 rupees now become 48 rupees per dollar. This also affected the export oriented company, and this has reduced, this has made the company unprofitable, a loss making company of 60,000. Now, realizing this, the company negotiated with the exporter, negotiated with the Walmart, and increased the price of the unit from $8 to $9. When the company increased the unit from $8 to $9, further the volume of export declined to 7,000. From 10,000 it has declined to 7,000. However, the company, other thing remain constant, company got a profit of 1,74,000. Earlier it was making a loss of 60,000. By increasing the $1 price from 8 to 9, the company making a profit of 1,74,000. But volume has reduced, export volume has reduced from 10,000 to 7,000. Company realized that now time has come to increase the export volume, and there is no way we can do it by increasing the unit price of sale. The company has agreed that I have to reduce the unit price of sale and bring it to present value, present price, that is earlier price of $8, but some other way there is need to absorb the increased cost, and that other way is to, that is a direct cost. Direct cost, company try to absorb the direct cost, direct cost per unit 350, the company reduced to 300 by increasing efficiency, by reducing the raw material cost, by paying less amount of salary wages to employee, they reduce the direct cost to 300 per unit, and however, they reduce the unit cost of export from $9 to $8, and this way the company make 60,000, 60 lakh 8,000 profit. Earlier it was making a 17 lakh 4,000. Now, they because of reduction of price from $9 to $8 per unit, a reduction of direct cost from 350 to 300, they made they increased the contribution margin and increase and also the sales volume increased from 7,000 to 12,000, and there is a profit of 60 lakh 8,000. And this is the way the company try to absorb the operating cost or the operating exposure. What way we have done it? We have done it, the sales, total sales in INR is spot rate into price per unit into total sale in unit. Similarly, direct cost in INR, the total direct cost in INR nothing but direct cost per unit into total sale in unit. Contribution margin, that is spot rate into price per unit minus direct cost per unit, and profit is contribution margin into total unit sales minus the fixed cost. This is the way we follow to calculate. And then what is the initial phase? Initial phase was the company selling at $8 per unit, and spot rate was 51 rupees per USD, and total amount of sale per is 15,000 unit. The company was making a profit of 4,70,000. Now, after next is INR appreciated from 51 to 48 rupees, unit sale decline from 15,000 to 10,000, and this lead to decline in contribution margin from 58 rupees to 34 rupees. Then profit margin also decline from 4,70,000 to minus 60,000, that is a loss for the company. And the company realized that loss, and they increased the price of the product. When they increase the unit price of the product from $8 to $9, the demand fall and demand reduced to 7,000, and however, the company observed there is a positive increase in the profit, but sales volume reduced from 15,000 to 7,000. The company realized that there is a requirement for the company to increase the sales volume, and they reduce the price of the per unit sold, that is per unit price was earlier $9, they reduce it to $8, but try to absorb the cost through the other way, that is the direct manufacturing cost. The direct manufacturing cost, if you see that by reduce direct manufacturing cost, they reduce from 350 per unit Indian rupee per unit to 300 per unit, and by reducing the per unit cost from $9 to $8 and reducing the direct cost from 350 to 300, the company make a profit of 6,08,000. And this reduction in direct manufacturing cost possible may be because of sourcing the low cost raw material, low cost labor input, and also by increasing the efficiency within the organization. And this is only possible to this is the only way the company can possible to absorb the operating exposure. But it is also possible for the company by exporting the looking at the exporting in from the Walmart to any other organization or the other company, which can give them more price than the $8 per unit. But that possibility is there only by searching the new market, new vendor, new importer for company, and this is a long term measure, not a short term measure. Short term measure is to absorb the cost by reducing what is called the direct manufacturing cost, and also by increasing the efficiency within the organization, so that manufacturing cost can be reduced. If you understood this problem of operating cost affect the every stages of the operation, every unit of the operation, and all unit together need to absorb this or plan to absorb the operating exposure. And this is possibilities are there by negotiating for higher price with the vendor, reducing the domestic labor cost, sourcing the raw material from other country, from other sources where cost of raw material may be lower, improving the manufacturing and delivery supply chain, because within the supply chain of manufacturing or delivery there may be many inefficiencies there, that possibilities are there by improving the manufacturing and delivery supply chain, producing at optimum level, because here if you see the earlier example, they were exporting 15,000, but planned production was 20,000 units. So, there is a inefficiency in production system also. They can increase by another 5,000 unit and exporting it to other country, that possibilities are there. Producing at optimum level of optimum level and exporting it to other country against which domestic currency has not appreciated. This is another example by sourcing the export from one seller to many seller, or one sources of currency to any other currency area, that also possibilities are there. It generally happen one domestic currency might have appreciated for dollar against the dollar, it may not have so for pound sterling, for yen, for euro, or any other currency. So, possibilities are there, you can find other vendor, other importer to get to where we can supply our other part of the export unit, and this is the way we can observe what is called the operating exposure. When we try to manage the operating exposure, there are many other ways to manage the operating exposure, and that we will be discussing in our next session. To understand the operating exposure for assessment and quantification, you can go through the International Financial Management book by Yoon and Resnick. You also go through the Multinational Financial Management by Jeff and Madura, and also the possibility something you can also discuss with the multinational manufacturing company, multinational financial management by Alan and Shapiro. These three books we can go through that and see how you can understand the assessment and management of operating exposure. For model questions, the model question here I have given a simple problem. A battery company in India, they are exporting battery to car manufacturing manufacturer in US. They have signed an agreement with the car manufacturer in US to supply battery. They are supplying 15,000 unit of battery at a rate of $125 per unit. When they do it, they sign the contract, that time dollar was 51 per unit, 51 Indian rupee per dollar. When this is the plan time of plan measure plan, the company had signed an agreement with the US company. However, the company CFO came through his calculation, through his assessment, they came to know that the dollar may, Indian rupee may appreciate against the US dollar next by 5% next year, and it may continue to continue at that same level next 2 years. The question is, if the appreciations are there over the period, next year 5% appreciations are there, then it may affect the company plan proposal, and company may face the operating exposure. They need to plan to absorb this operating exposure. And then plan was drawn through this example. The company does not generate any kind of other sales, there is no other export, whatever the battery they manufacture, they are exporting to US. The fixed cost of the operation is $25 million Indian rupee. The direct cost for manufacturing, per unit manufacturing battery was manufactured in India, per unit manufacturing was 6,000 rupees. Then question is, after the forecasting of the appreciation of Indian rupee, what should be the strategy for the company to adjust this operating exposure? Why operating exposure arise here? Because significant part of the battery manufactured battery, that is something around 15,000, they were exporting abroad, that is to US area, US currency, that is dollar. And there is a prediction that Indian rupee may appreciate by 5% coming 1 year, and the appreciation continue till after 2 years also. So, there is, because future cash flow involved, after 1 year, after next 2-3 years, they will get a future cash flow that in form of US dollar. A dollar will be depreciating against Indian rupee. So, the future cash flow when they get in dollar, they will convert into Indian rupee, and Indian rupee will be appreciating against dollar. So, they will get less amount of Indian rupee, and this less amount of Indian rupee may affect their competitiveness, may affect their what is called the profitability of the company, and they then need to absorb this kind of operating exposure. And the question, how they have done it? Same thing what we discussed earlier example. What they do? First, the currency is appreciating. So, if you see the price of the battery is $125, when they price it, that time Indian rupee was spot rate was 51 rupees. So, fixed cost is 25 million Indian rupee, and direct cost per unit, the to manufacture 1 unit of battery, it is 6,000 Indian rupee. So, the contribution per unit is 375. How I got the 375? 125 into 51 minus 6,000, nothing but 375 rupees per manufacturing 1 unit of car battery and exporting it to US. They got 375 per unit, that is profit per unit. Then plant sale, they are exporting how many? 15,000. So, sales amount 15,000 into 125 into 51, that is sales amount, this is a sales amount. Then fixed cost already given to you 25 millions Indian rupee. Direct cost, per unit of direct cost is 6,000 into 15,000, 6,000 per unit of cost to produce in India, and how many they are producing? 15,000. So, this 15,000 and 6,000 is nothing but the direct cost in India, and sales minus fixed cost minus direct cost is the profit for the company, the domestic company. So, this profit is this much. When 125 unit is the cost of, that is the price of the battery in dollar term, and rupee remains as 51,000. Now, suppose rupee appreciates by 5%, that is the rupee become 51 to 48.45. 48.45, same amount remain constant, everything remain constant. So, the contribution unit declined to 56.25. Since rupee appreciate, the export declined from 15,000 to 10,000. Now, after this everything remain constant. So, there is a loss for the company, this is a loss for the company. Now, company realize there is a loss, they increase the price of the battery in US dollar. So, they increase from 125 to 130, everything remain constant, that. So, they make a profit of what is called, again they are, because they increase the price from $125 to $130, the market decline, and plant sales reduce from 10,000 to 7,000, and continue to make profit of, they continue to make loss of 4,10,000. Realizing that this is not a strategy by to maintain the profit margin, they have to do some other way, and they have done it. They first they again reduce the price and brought it to 125 earlier price. However, they have gone for reducing the direct cost per unit by increasing efficiency, by sourcing the raw material from other low cost raw material, they reducing the labor cost by what is called the improving the efficiency of the organization. They reduce the direct manufacturing cost from 6,000 to 5,000, and in this process they made a profit of, this is the profit they make, this is the profit they make it. So, here you have to understand that by increasing the price of unit, you cannot improve the cannot reduce the operating cost. Operating cost need to be absorbed by proper planning way, by either through renegotiation with the vendor, with the exporter importer, by increasing the what is called sales volume, by reducing the price, by improving the cost efficiency, by going for what is called that improving the sales what is your efficiency in the organization, by sourcing the raw material from other sources where it is cheaply available, by reducing the overall cost of the company, because you have to operate in a highly thin margin, highly competitive environment, where operating cost, operating exposure cannot be reduced by increasing the price of the items. With this, let me conclude that operating exposure assessment and their quantification we have discussed. Next class we will be discussing about the management of operating exposure. Thank you.